Hello, it's Andy Parks from the Washington Times, and I'll be joined momentarily by Jeff Mordock, Washington Times White House reporter. But first, as a listener to my podcast, you qualify to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times, and all you have to do is go to washingtontimes.com/Andy. That's washingtontimes.com/ANDY. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Jeff Mordock, Washington Times White House reporter. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Andy, how are you today?
Doing just fine, thank you. Majority of progressive priorities will be in Biden's slimmer social welfare bill. Now, this comes from, what's her name, Pramila Jayapal?
Jayapal, yes.
Yeah.
Democrat from Washington, and she's the leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. She's one of the furthest left Democrat members of Congress.
Now, they had hoped for a bigger chunk of the $3.5 trillion social welfare program and climate change bill, but that is going to be significantly reduced. But it sounds as if she's still happy with what they're getting.
It does. She was vague on the details, so we don't have a lot of details, but she did say 5 of her top priorities will be included. She seemed very happy with that. She did acknowledge that she's not getting the 3.5 trillion that she wanted, and most likely it's going to be somewhere around 2.2 trillion. We'll see what the final numbers are, because it's not clear if the moderates who are holding this bill up based on that kind of spending are going to be on board with that. After she was done with her meeting with President Biden, the moderates came in and had their meeting, and they left without talking to the press at all. So we don't know where they stand on what Jayapal said. We don't know how they view things, and we're really not even sure what priorities that she says will be included will be. So there's still a lot up in the air on them.
All right, Jensaki mocks supply chain woes, the tragedy of the treadmill delayed. That's the title of one of your stories. This administration has no working knowledge of the economy as far as I can see. I mean, she jokes about the treadmill being late, but it's almost as if they don't realize folks have jobs that are directly related to the manufacturing, packaging, and delivery of such a product.
Well, it speaks to two things. It speaks to this administration being out of touch. Remember, Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, tweeted last week that the supply chain, I forget his exact words, but basically implied it's a rich person problem. And Jen Psaki's basically laughing, saying during a global supply crisis, oh, we're not getting treadmills. But it's food, it's necessary items, it's a lot of important things that are coming through the supply chain that we need that are being disrupted. And the other thing it points to is this administration seems to be almost mocking crises at this point. Yesterday, there was an exchange with her in Fox News' Peter Doocy, where he was asking about flights bringing migrant children from the border to Westchester, New York. And she laughed it off by saying, oh, those flights might be earlier than you would take. It just seems like this tone deafness that they're trying to be funny and congenial, and it's just not landing right because they're not picking their spots correctly on what they should be making jokes about.
Yeah. And you brought up grocery stores, important things to most people, to all people. I don't know if she's been to a grocery store lately, but I can tell you that yesterday, one of the big chain supermarket CEOs came out to warn consumers about what's coming, or in this case, maybe what's not coming.
Well, also it's going to be hard to get your kids their holiday toys and things like that, which, it's more than just people getting treadmills for their own purposes. There's a lot of important things that come through here. And it just seems like they just don't understand that or grasp through the supply chain.
All right, I'm going to take you to another one of your stories. White House says Trump tried to subvert the Constitution and Congress should access records. Is this another diversion like the impeachment effort?
I don't think it's a diversion, because you can see how serious they are about making sure the January 6th committee has all the documents and all of the relative records relating back to the Trump administration that are stored at the National Archives. We don't know what's going to be in those records. We don't know how valuable they are. We don't know what's said in them. So it's really hard to judge whether or not this is a stunt right now until we see what the evidence is and what comes out. And make our decision from there. For now, it's just vague documents in the National Archives. It could be anything.
Yep. Biden to participate in CNN town hall in Baltimore. That's not the only place he's headed this week. He wants to sell his big spending package, right?
Baltimore, and he's going to Scranton, Pennsylvania, the town where he was born in, although he moved out of there when he was 10. The Scranton one, I think, is particularly interesting because he's really going to try and sell his blue collar roots there and really try to, highlight his blue collar ties, which are somewhat of a myth. I mean, he's a guy who grew up in the corporate capital of the world, Delaware. He was a lawyer, and he was elected to the Senate at a fairly young age. So I think he's got strong ties. The blue collar workers do love him. He's always positioned himself as a blue collar champion, but it's a bit of a myth there.
I noticed in the Baltimore town hall at CNN, they have selected the audience.
That is correct. It is, yes. But, that happened at the last town hall, too. And there's a reason, President Biden does these things on CNN and does not seem to do these on any other network.
Disgusted, Biden's support from police has disintegrated in just under 9 months, one of your stories. Most rank-and-file cops supported Trump because of his open display of admiration for law enforcement communities, right?
That's correct. The unions in the rank and files both went heavily for Trump in the 2016 election because he was an unabashed supporter of law enforcement, whereas Biden really was worried about upsetting his liberal base by coming out in support of police officers. His denunciations of the riots last summer were tepid at best, really, really was weak on condemning them, and that angered a lot of law enforcement. And now here we are almost 9 months into his administration, and that relationship with police has gone from bad to worse. Trump administration, the White House would have the Attorney General, whether it was Bill Barr or Jeff Sessions, up there to honor law enforcement and give out law enforcement medals. You don't hear that. You don't hear a lot of praise for police officers, even on the National Law Enforcement Memorial this past weekend, where President Biden went up and spoke. He lectured them a little bit about the need for police reform, which I thought was interesting at an event there to honor police officers and the sacrifices they made.
Especially at this time of low morale and police retirements and resignations, why in the world would you slap at him?
Well, I think it goes back to he wants to appease his liberal base. He's promised police reform bill. He's got to get something done. I think after this economic fight is over, police reform is going to be their top priority, and he's gearing up for that fight. It's the number one issue in the African American community is police reform. In my story, I talked to an African American police officer who personally endorsed Joe Biden in 2020, and he even acknowledged that he's disappointed that there hasn't been more pro-police rhetoric out of the administration, and says that that's something the administration really needs to address, as you said, and officers are walking off the beat.
All right, before I let you run, what are you working on?
A story about President Biden's business regulations. He's been jamming through a lot of business regulations. Now, he says these are necessary to improve competition. They're necessary to bring power back to the workers. Businesses say they stifle growth. I just want to point out one regulation that I think is really stunning that a lot of people aren't aware of. On his very first day in office, President Biden signed an executive order allowing agencies to create rules that, such as human dignity, interests of future generations. And that's a real switch for the government, which used to base their decisions on business rules on a cost benefit analysis. So now you've got these undefined terms. What does human dignity mean? What does that look like? What does the interest of a future generation look like? How do you define that? You can't. And the Biden administration saying that's okay, you can't define it. But what that's really doing is really sacrificing business growth and basically allowing these agencies to ram through whatever business regulation they want to in the name of these vague principles.
I look forward to the story, as do many others. Folks, you can read all of Jeff Mordock's stories at WashingtonTimes.com. As always, thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Andy. Really appreciate it.
Washington Times White House reporter Jeff Mordock. Thanks for joining me today, and remember to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Go to WashingtonTimes.com/Andy. You'll get 24/7 digital access to the Washington Times at 50% off. Again, go to WashingtonTimes.com/ANDY. I'm Andy Parks. Have a great day.